Welcome back, warriors. It is time for week 3 of our adventure in digital learning. So I hope you had a good weekend. For me, weekends are actually a little bit harder than the work week because I find that I don't have a schedule and I don't have like things that I can go and do, which is really hard for me. So I hope that you guys find your rhythm. I hope that you are kind of coming up with a way for this to work for you. If not, I strongly recommend that you reach out to me or to other teachers right now, and let us know what your difficulties are and let us know what we can do to try to make this a little bit easier. So this week, we're going to be wrapping up Unit 7. By the time we get to the end of this week, we are going to be done with the Renaissance, Reformation, and Exploration portion of this class, which means that you will have an assessment on Friday. It will address all the vocab words that you had received at the very beginning of last week. If you have lost those, go back, I believe, to Monday, possibly even earlier than that, might have been the first week of distance learning, and find the downloadable list of all the vocab for Unit 7. You will also find that I've put up a Quizlet today of terms that have to do with Unit 7. So I would start working through those now, because on Friday you will be assessed on them. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working through the results of contact. That is, the results of contact between Afro-Eurasia and the Americas. Now, on Friday, you should have watched a documentary that I linked to in the blog. This documentary talked about essentially the connection, the contact that resulted starting in 1492 with European exploration, with Columbus's contact into the Americas, and things that followed as a result. Today, we're going to be really diving into what we call the Columbian Exchange, and we're going to kind of dive our way in, and we're going to do this in pieces. So today we're going to cover the more positive aspects of the Columbian Exchange. Tomorrow, I gotta tell you, is all doom and gloom, as is Wednesday. This is a hard week, guys, in terms of like morals and ethics with regards to the stuff we got to talk about. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about demographic collapse and genocide, so that's fun. And then on Wednesday, we are going to be talking about forced labor and enslavement of people. It's going to get really ugly, and you're just going to have to like grin and bear it and try to work your way through it. So let's go ahead and get started today. So, when we talk about the Columbian Exchange, what we are really talking about is this enormous moment of collision where we have the old world, that is Afro-Eurasia, that is Africa, Europe, and Asia. That's kind of how we blend it all together there. Afro-Eurasia, all of which has been in contact with each other for a long time. We've been talking about this going back to Unit 1, but the Americas have been largely isolated, and now they are going to be brought into the conversation with other continents, and that has got some big effects as a result. So coming from the Columbian Exchange, one of the most notable things that occurs is this transformation of the natural environment. We have all sorts of life forms, biota, fauna, flora, diseases that flow from one continent system to another. So coming from the Americas, we have goods that have a lot to do with food, especially plants. We have the transformation of food systems because plants that were foods rather that were native to the Americas included squash, turkeys, cacao. We already talked about cocoa. Peanuts, avocados, pumpkins, pineapple, tomatoes, peppers, vanilla, sweet potatoes, and corn. All of these things are native to the Americas. Remember, I keep telling you through this course that like if you got into a time machine and were spiraling out of control into the past, you should aim for the Americas. You'll eat better there. You probably won't starve to death. So the Americas have all of these food crops that move from the Americas to Africa, to Europe, to Asia. They flow not just across the Atlantic, but also across the Pacific. They also have some things that are of medical value. There is a bark extract called quinine, and quinine can be used to treat malaria. Malaria was actually an old world disease. It was more common in sub-Saharan Africa and in parts of Asia, but the treatment that helps subdue some of the symptoms was only found in the Americas, which is pretty cool. And we're pretty sure that one disease that originated in the Americas and then flowed to Afro-Eurasia was syphilis. Yup, that disease. That one gets complicated. We're not going to talk explicitly about how that happened, but y'all can do your own research. But coming from Afro-Eurasia and flowing into the Americas, we also saw new plants and animals. We saw olives and grapes and onions, citrus fruits. Things like oranges are not native to Florida. They were native to various places in Southeast Asia and eventually made their way over to Europe. And from Europe, especially Spain, made their way to Florida. Like Florida had no oranges before this. Georgia had no peaches. Peaches are Asian. And so they made their way all the way from Afro-Eurasia into the Americas. Everything from wheat to bananas, sugarcane, coffee beans, oats and barley and rice, all of those goods, all of those crops made their way into the Americas. But perhaps what was more important in terms of transforming the Americas was the livestock. We had cattle and horses. Honeybees were brought in by explorers. You had sheep and sheep and pigs that came in as well. And pigs, as we will talk about shortly, were massively important. But perhaps the thing that changed the environment the most in the Americas were the diseases. In Afro-Eurasia, you had regular outbreaks of everything from smallpox and influenza, that's the flu, diphtheria, which is another lung-based disease, typhus, which is fecal-borne and affects the stomach and intestines. You have whooping cough, measles, malaria, all of these horrible diseases. People in Africa and Europe and Asia had been exposed to them for generations upon generations, and they were still very devastating diseases, but those people had some innate immunities to those diseases, simply by virtue of having grown up in an environment where you were exposed to those diseases quite frequently. And sometimes you even inherit a little bit of immunity from your mother, largely through like breastfeeding. Like that's one way that you get the antibodies into your system fairly early on. If your mother has been exposed to something, sometimes you take in some of those antibodies yourself as an infant. But people in the Americas had been exposed to none of those diseases. And so as a result, everything from rhinovirus, the common cold, to influenza and diphtheria would rage through American populations in a way that no one had ever really seen before. So broadly, when we talk about the Columbian Exchange, what we mean is that we are talking about the way in which the natural environment of the Americas and Europe and Africa and Asia were transformed through this new biota. Biota is a term that I want you to use frequently here. It means plants, animals, and pathogens, basically anything living. And it so transformed the world that especially in the Americas, a lot of natural American species were unable to compete with the types of plants that were brought to the Americas. Think about it, if you drive through like Kansas and Nebraska, you're going to see acre after acre of wheat, right? Tons of wheat, as far as you can see. That wheat is not native to the Americas. It crowds out existing crops, existing grasses, all sorts of things that were native here get replaced by these invasive species that get brought in. And so as a result, you start to have species go extinct. Okay. In fact, there's a lot of scholarship suggesting that we don't even know what sort of prairie grasses are native in the Americas. When we think about sort of the rolling plains out in the middle of the US, like we don't even know what grasses are native there anymore because so many of the species of grass that grow in the plains now are non-native. They were brought from somewhere else. And we have no record of what is or is not native in that case. But it's not all bad news. one of the most important things to come out of the Columbian Exchange was an increase in the ability globally to be able to feed populations. Foods like potatoes and corn could grow in soils that could not grow things like rice or could not grow things like wheat. And so all of a sudden, populations that had been on the verge of starvation and famine had new food resources. And so what you see, particularly in Afro-Eurasia following the Columbian Exchange, is population growth. Populations skyrocket around the globe because there's new food availability for them. That is not true in the Americas, and we're going to talk about why tomorrow. But before I leave you today, I want to read you a passage from a really, really excellent book. It's called 1491. And it's by Charles Mann. Charles Mann is a historian, and 1491 is a book that is a really excellent attempt to try and describe the world as it was in the Americas the year before contact, the year before Columbus's arrival. What was it like in the Americas just on the brink of contact? And he has a really excellent section where he talks about the results of that contact in 1492 and after. And in it in particular, he focuses in on the explorer de Soto. So here we go. On May 30th of 1539, Hernando de Soto landed his private army near Tampa Bay in Florida. Soto, as he was called, was a novel figure, half warrior, half venture capitalist. He had grown very rich, very young, by becoming a market leader in the nascent trade for Indian slaves. The profits had helped to fund Pizarro's seizure of the Incan Empire, which had made Soto wealthier still. Looking quite literally for new worlds to conquer, he persuaded the Spanish crown to let him loose in North America. He spent one fortune to make another. And he came to Florida with 200 horses, 600 soldiers, and 300 pigs. From today's perspective, it is difficult to imagine the ethical system that would justify Soto's actions. For 4 years, his force, looking for gold, wandered through what is now Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Texas, wrecking almost everything it touched. The inhabitants often fought back vigorously, but they had never before encountered an army with horses and guns. Soto died of fever with his expedition in ruins, and along the way his men had managed to rape, torture, enslave, and kill countless Indians. But the worst thing the Spaniards did, some researchers say, was entirely without malice. Bring the pigs. When Soto died... Well, rather, when he arrived, there were 300 pigs that he brought. By the time of his death, there were thousands. They ate everything in their path. They were non-native invasive species, and they carried new diseases, and they carried them into places that had never seen them before. So if you are looking for the long-term consequences of the Columbian Exchange, one of the things you have to do is think about stuff that doesn't involve humans, stuff that involves plant life, stuff that involves animals, what it does to our food supply, what it does to diseases. So what I'm going to have you guys do today, since you've now watched kind of the scientific background on the Columbian Exchange, and now you've watched this lecture, is I'm going to have you guys go to your pantry. I want you to find for me your favorite food, or maybe the ingredients that you need to make your favorite food. And I'm going to ask you in the form below to describe, first of all, what the food is and what the major ingredients are. And then I want you to tell me which ones wouldn't have been combined together prior to the Columbian Exchange. That is, I want you to tell me how the Columbian Exchange resulted in your favorite food. I'll bet you every single one of them probably has some aspect to it. So at any rate, guys, I hope you have a good day. Tomorrow and Wednesday are going to get pretty dense in terms of the topics we've got to talk about. So let me know if you need help walking through them, and hang in there. I will hopefully see you guys relatively soon. Take care.